It's the same thing every February 2nd.
We wake up and we look to a groundhog to let us know how much longer winter will last.
There's a perfect shadow cast of me. 6 more weeks of winter there will be.
But Phil has been more of a flop when it comes to his forecast. So are there more reliable animals we should be paying attention to instead?
Marine mammals, fish, birds, even terrestrial mammals can respond or react to early changes in barometric pressure.
We talk one-on-one with biologist Jeff Corwin on the instincts of some animals.
That could tell us if a storm is on the way with way more precision than a rodent seeing a shadow. The 10 on NECN starts now.
Well, you know how there's like a day for everything now, like National Pizza Day, National Puppy Day.
I like both of those. National Talk Like a Pirate Day. I don't know what accent that is. Pretty bad. National Tequila Day, personal favorite of mine, late in July, if you're putting that on your calendar. And while we might not understand the origin story behind all these weird days, we can still celebrate them.
Yeah, we certainly can. And that's pretty much what we do with Groundhog Day, right? No rhyme or reason there. But every February 2nd, millions of people watch scenes just like this one of what happened early this morning. The famous Punxsutawney Phil emerging from his burrow, and depending on whether he sees his own shadow or not, that will decide if we have 6 more weeks of winter or an early spring.
Seems like a reliable way to do things. So what happened this year? Well, you see right here behind me, Punxsutawney Phil saw his shadow. That means 6 more weeks of winter for us. But when you really think about it, this American tradition is kind of weird, right? It's essentially just a rodent predicting the weather for the next month and a half.
And we have a lot of questions about this because, quite frankly, we should, right? Can animals even predict the weather? And that is our starting point tonight.
He saw his shadow. Apparently, he did think that way. When it comes to Groundhog Day, is Phil even on point? Kind of hovering over my shoulder there, trying to bite out of my head there. Someone needs to hold the woodchuck those in Punxsutawney call the prognosticator of prognosticators and weather prophet accountable. That's where we come in. We looked into how often this whistle pig was actually correct and whether or not it would be more accurate than flipping a coin, or if the notoriously bad free throw shooter Shaquille O'Neal had a better chance of sinking a foul shot. Well, here's what we found out. Live Science crunched the numbers and found that the groundhog and determined that forecaster Phil only 39% successful, which is incredibly bad when it comes to really guessing anything. Because if you flipped a coin instead of listening to that oversized ground squirrel, you would have better odds. Heads at spring, tails you lose. 50% right with a coin. You're going to get it half the time. And even the man known as the Big Shamrock has better luck at the charity stripe than Phil does at guessing the weather. Shaq's free throw percentage, one of the worst all time in the NBA at just 52%. But look, still way better than Phil. So
we checked in with a real meteorologist, our very own Chris Cloninger, to find out if there's any science behind the groundhog's prediction. Can you actually learn more about the weather by looking for your shadow? Now, he says no. And he also says don't believe anyone who says they can forecast the weather that far out.
It's interesting. The American Meteorological Society says anything over 10 days, you really can't claim accuracy. Essentially, what the groundhog's forecast is a seasonal forecast. Anything above 10 days, the accuracy goes down. And they're not saying how much snow we're going to get. They're not saying how cold it's going to be.
So if Phil is so off base all the time, why do we have Groundhog Day? Why do we wake up and think about it every February 2nd? When we spoke with world-renowned biologist and Massachusetts native Jeff Corwin. Corwin has studied wildlife conservation for more than 2 decades now. He's best known for hosting shows like Going Wild with Jeff Corwin and the Jeff Corwin Experience. And he says when it comes to Groundhog Day, it's the human thing more than anything else.
I think we often are anthropomorphic about this. We like to give these human-like qualities to animals or something almost supernatural happening here. But the truth is animals really can't predict the weather. But what they can do is have almost a quicker reflex response to changes in the weather that human beings aren't in tune to.
And a lot of animals have senses that far outperform us as humans, ours. So they can actually smell, taste, hear, or even feel changes in the atmosphere much quicker than we can. It's just one of the reasons Jeff points out that humans have a lot to learn from animals.
I think we've only peeled back the onion skin depth of the marvels of how animals are so hyper-connected to what's going on in the world in ways that we don't even realize. And there are many examples, for example, with livestock, cows, or even wild animals like deer, when they're sensing changes in barometric pressure and atmospheric changes with air and water, that biologically they know that that means there's a storm a-brewing, there's a winter blizzard coming. They will react in certain ways where there's evidence of, well, I knew we were going to get that bad blizzard because the cows were at the fence and they were extremely hungry, or all the deer were filled up into the field because they're filling themselves up with energy to survive that cold, deep storm that'll be impacting them the next day.
Interesting examples there. Maybe one of the biggest examples we've seen in recent history, back in 2004 with that tsunami in Indonesia. That disaster killed more than 200,000 people. But something happened with the animals. According to NBC News, an article back in 2005, elephants there started to panic, even break free from their chains just to get to higher ground just minutes before that tsunami hit. And elephants weren't the only animals that managed to get to safety there. We asked Corwin about how this could have happened.
And there is some evidence to suggest, for example, elephants are hyper-tuned to very tiny vibrations that humans physically cannot sense without technology. So yes, there is evidence with birds swimming out of harm's way or flying out of harm's way. Sharks, for example, there's evidence to show how sharks will actually dive very deep during major events like this to avoid finding themselves in physical trauma or danger. Those animals that might be stuck in harm's way have a better physical way or route for escape that a human being simply wouldn't.
And if you're thinking to yourself, sure, tsunamis are rare and catastrophic instances, so it makes sense that animals might be able to pick up on that specifically. Well, Corwin says it's not just especially horrific natural disasters where animals' instincts kick in.
Marine mammals, fish, birds, many insect species, even terrestrial mammals can respond or react to early changes in barometric pressure, changes in atmospheric air and water pressure that will cause them to react in a certain way, especially, for example, if there's something like a hurricane or a big storm happening.
Take a huge storm to tip off some of those animals either, as Corwin was mentioning. Sometimes it's just a simple change in the temperature can make a difference in their behavior.
Crickets can predict the change in temperature. So you can actually look at a cricket and its calls, its chirping will increase with the warming up of the environment. But what's actually happening is the cricket itself physically is acting like a thermometer. As its body warms up, its behavior changes. So we're often seeing that too. Animals are reacting physically to a change in the environment, and we're saying, oh, they're predicting it. In fact, they are reacting to it.
And now that we know there are some serious weather watchers in the animal kingdom, why all the hype around the hog, the groundhog that is? Well, the annual tradition definitely got bolstered by this 1990s cult classic movie. You know it, Groundhog Day.
Groundhog Day! Groundhog time. 1,000 people freezing their butts off waiting to worship a rat.
It's one of Bill Murray's best movies, released in 1993. This movie certainly upped Phil's profile in Hollywood, but the Groundhog Day tradition goes back far beyond that, Tim.
I'm glad we can even get Ned Ryerson in there. It's a doozy. Well, they've been doing that Hog and Pony show in Gobbler's Knot for more than 100 years now. The day truly a time-honored tradition, at least there. Really, every February since 1887 on the 2nd, the groundhog has been plucked from that burrow and try to make sense of the upcoming weather pattern by whether or not it sees its shadow. Because back in 1887, there was a newspaper editor in Punxsutawney, Pennsylvania, who declared that Phil is America's only true weather forecasting groundhog. Kinda. If there's simply no evidence behind the groundhog's connection to weather, how come we're still celebrating the day more than a century later?
Just incredible creatures, and there's absolutely no evidence to suggest that groundhogs are great at predicting the weather, that they're the ambassadors of what environmental changes are to come. It's just something we stuck to that happened in the 1800s.
I think we all kind of knew that, but there are many others. Phil might be the most famous, but towns and cities all across North America have their own weather predicting rodents.
Exactly. From Buckeye Chuck in, you guessed it, Buckeye County, Ohio, to the appropriately named Staten Island Chuck.
And after Staten Island, Chuck, you go to General Beauregard Lee. That's down in Jackson, Georgia. And then you have maybe my favorite name of the entire group. That's Pierre C. Chadeau in Louisiana, spelled the kind of French way. You got a hedgehog in Portland, Oregon, all sorts of different ones.
Yeah, and in Chattanooga, Chuck, you got him from good old Tennessee. Chuckles from Connecticut, too. And here's my favorite, Massachusetts' own Miss G. And if you missed her moment this morning, you can see her looking for her shadow on the Mass Audubon Drumlin Farm Facebook page today. And there's a bit of a plot twist here, Tim, because Miss G did not see her shadow. So she is predicting a shorter winter, which conflicts with Phil's prediction.